All right, it's 10:45, so let's get this going. Welcome to educational session 5. Oh my gosh, hold on a second. Welcome back. We have 2 great presentations today. Corey Neimer, Gordon Daines from BYU will be presenting collections as data in the L. Tom Perry Special Collections. And then we'll have a second presentation from Utah State University, Paul Daybell, Liz Wolcott, Kelly Rovegno. I'm sorry if I'm getting your names wrong. Andrea Payant, Becky Skeen, and Heather Housley. It's time for an EAD glow up. How to make finding aids more attractive to users. Also points to Gryffindor for an amazing title. We'll go ahead and just get them started. We will save all of the Q&A until the end of both presentations. So take it away.
Okay, great. All right. Well, we are delighted to be here to share a work in progress report on a project that Corey and I have been working on over the last year or so. We first became interested in collections as data as a result of a research project that we've been involved in, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Let's see if this will actually work. Okay, so collections as data is I don't know that I would call it a recent phenomenon, but it has become more interesting to archivists in the profession. But I want to give a little bit of a background before we talk about collections as data in the Perry Special Collections. And we're going to start from the researcher's perspective. So collections as data is used in a computational research setting. And on the screen is a model computational research methodology. The important point really is identifying the available data. And a lot of researchers want to use data from our collections. And that data can be the metadata about the finding aids. It can actually be the text of documents in our collections. And then they'll run an analysis, and then they will analyze the results and do some sort of report on those results. So there are a number of different computational approaches. We won't talk about all of them. There's corpus analysis, there's visualization, there's mapping, as well as machine learning. The major project that Corey and I were involved in that introduced us to data collections as data was an analysis we did several years ago of the American Archivist. We took all of the text of the articles of the American Archivist. We cleaned up the OCR, and then we ran the text through a tool called Voyant and did a textual analysis of the American Archivist to identify key themes that had emerged in the professional journal over the course of time to kind of help us understand what's been important decade by decade in terms of our professional journal at a national level. That was just kind of a sidelight. We were more interested in actually figuring out how Voyant worked and what sorts of processes would be necessary in order to successfully run a project using computational approaches. Other computational approaches are data visualization, mappings, machine learning. There's all kinds of different things that you can do. So I'm not going to go over the list here. This is mainly so that you have access to it, but there's all kinds of things in our collections that could potentially be used as data by researchers. Just highlighting a couple here: theses and dissertations, the text of theses and dissertations. A lot of people are interested in taking the text of letters and diaries and being able to do computational analysis or machine learning utilizing that kind of information. And then there's all kinds of scientific information that's been collected by a variety of archives that lends itself to computational analysis. So in I think it was 2018, a group of archivists got together, led by Thomas Padilla, who was formerly at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and they put together what they call the Santa Barbara Statement on Principles regarding collections as data. And I'm just going to highlight a couple of these. I won't go through all of them. But the first one is collections as data development aims to encourage computational use of digitized and born digital collections. The fourth one that we think is important, and this is actually what we've been trying to figure out at BYU, collections as data designed for everyone serves no one. Specific needs inform collections as data development. You need to actually have a use case and understand what those use cases are so that people can potentially use your data. I'll be upfront, it's a lot of time and effort to put data into a format where it can be used computationally. 9 is data as well as the data that describes those data. See how many times you can use the word data in a sentence, are considered in scope. So metadata about our collections is data that could potentially be useful. Taking a finding aid or an aggregate of all of the finding aids of a repository, doing a textual analysis of that could reveal some interesting things. And so when we talk about collections as data, it's not just the collection materials themselves, it's also the descriptions about the collections. And then the last one, the development of collection as data is an ongoing process and does not necessarily conclude with a final version. It's an iterative process. It's like description. Actually, it's like everything in archives. We're iterative. We're always learning new things. And I think that's really important to point out in this particular context. All right. So if you're an archivist, oops, that went not far enough. There we go. If you're an archivist and you're interested in creating data sets that could be used for computational analysis, this is a fairly simplified process that each step could be broken into multiple steps. So you have to identify the collections materials you're going to use. You have to get them out, pull them, make sure they're in a digital format. You need to clean them up. Then you need to do data enrichment. You need to package the data set so that it's actually usable. And then you put it out and make it available so that people can utilize it in terms of data analysis. So there's a fantastic blog post by our friends Corey Lampert and Emily Lapworth, who are both at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. That's called "What Do We Mean by Collections as Data?" That was put up in 2020. And they make several recommendations about how you get started with collections as data. Probably the most important one is the one we've listed there first. You need to start small and then create goals that you can get successfully accomplish and then just build on them. The second point they make, we've already reiterated, there's the creation of data sets that serve a known user need. The other corollary there is when you are putting together data sets, you have to think about what's the license you're going to release the data sets under, what rights are in the data, and how are you going to manage any potentially problematic privacy rights or copyrights. Let's go to it. So let's turn to some examples in the Perry Special Collections. And the first example I'm going to highlight, and then I'll turn it over to Corey, is a project that involved our alumni records. About a year and a half ago, Corey and I became really interested in figuring out, was there a way that we could use some data in what we call affectionately our alumni registers. These are registers that were created by the Alumni Association, and they contain all kinds of information about BYU students. You would be surprised and maybe even shocked in some cases about the things that your Alumni Association knows about you. We won't go there. Suffice it to say that it had names, dates of graduation, areas of study, home addresses, parents, that kind of information. What we wanted to do was a longitudinal analysis of the impact of a BYU education from 1875 to 1925. We've had a lot of great anecdotal information about what a BYU education did for people. We wanted to see, could we actually put some numbers behind these things that have been come out of various research projects. And in order to do that, we needed structured data. This is an image of one of the pages of the register. We actually had to have students, after we digitized the register, students had to go through and hand transcribe the information into an Excel spreadsheet so that we had the data in a structured format. We then shared that data with the records linking lab on the BYU campus. And they linked the data to the family search. They linked it to the US Census, and then they linked it to some other databases that are put out by the LDS Church. And that's allowed us to do some statistical analysis of the economic impact of a BYU education in its first 50 years of history. Not great. That's kind of the teaser. We can talk more about that if you're interested in it. We also were able to do some statistical analysis related to their involvement and activity in the LDS Church, which was actually really high. Attending BYU was a really good predictor of how active people are in the LDS Church. But this is one example of how you can take a collection and turn it into data that can be analyzed computationally. And Corey's going to talk about a couple of other examples.
Oh, it's already there. So just to mention a couple of other projects that maybe weren't conceived initially as being collections as data projects, but as we worked through it, we started to see the possibilities there. Student newspapers, of course, are something that most institutions are working on making available. And we've been working on a long-term digitization project for those for at least a decade now. Starting in 1884, and today I think we're somewhere around 1992, but still an ongoing project. With that digitization, though, our thought process has always been about access, just making sure that people would be able to see these newspapers remotely, helping to preserve our collection. And so we had them as part of that process, based largely on resources, just provide uncorrected OCR for those texts. So people would be able to view them, they'd be able to run a basic search, and hopefully if the OCR wasn't too bad, they'd be able to find what they were looking for more easily. When we started thinking about this in terms of collections as data, though, Gordon's already mentioned our project with the American Archivist. We realized that uncorrected OCR was really not all that helpful for doing corpus analysis work. So if we go back and as we've gone back and started looking at this, we've started to see that maybe digitization is just the first step in an overall process. So if we were thinking of this as collections as data, access is one thing, but we'll need to go back and correct that OCR and be able to make that available and put it on a platform where people will be able to more easily access it, download it, and manipulate it to be able to do that sort of corpus analysis, like at word frequency or usage over time within that overall corpus. Another of these transitional projects is the Benjamin Clough papers, which we're currently working on digitizing. The Clough papers, he's well, depending on how you describe it, he's maybe the first president of Brigham Young University. He's the third principal of Brigham Young Academy. So he's there for that transition period. But again, this is a project where we've been working on this for a long time. In the 1960s, we had an item level inventory put together. 2004, we'd moved that to EAD. We've just recently moved it into archive space. And we've started the digitization process. So we're going to be able to make that all available. But again, the proposal process was with this idea of just providing access, helping people to be able to use it more easily. But as we turn to collections as data, you've probably seen projects like the Johnson Circle project at Harvard or the project at Emory dealing with musicians. Those have often been described as being linked data projects. But we started to see those as collections as data projects, that making that metadata available in a way that you're able to run a computational analysis against it. You're able to find those networks and find connections maybe that you weren't able to see. So again, we've made great progress on that project and we're moving it into digitization, but we're now starting to see that as just the first step in making that data available and reusable by researchers to gain new insights into the administration of Benjamin Clough. So what are we trying to do about it? As Gordon's described it, collections as data is sort of a large project, and it's not something that we in special collections can really control. So what we've ended up doing for this project is focused on developing a set of guidelines or suggestions for curators in making decisions about what to digitize and how to have it digitized. Our process, I probably don't have time to talk through this. Literature review, drafting principles, getting feedback. In the end, just trying to involve all the stakeholders within our institution to try to build something that's not just focused on selection decisions. Let's go ahead. So we've thrown up a copy of the guidelines that we've put here. Again, I don't know that we have time to talk through those, but we focused on 3 main points. The first is just selection. In the end, special collections and university archives at BYU, we don't have a collection development policy for our digital collections. What we put up are just selections from our physical collections. And so in putting these principles together, just trying to encourage people to think about the uses and reuses of the data that's created through digitization. The second is just focusing on metadata enhancement. So like I said, we have a lot of projects that have been done or are in process, but the metadata that we're creating may not be sufficient to be able to enable these computational uses. So just encouraging curators to think about those outputs or those outcomes. And then the third is dealing with outputs. So again, creating the metadata in a structured way is only one piece of this. In the end, we have to also make it available to the community, packaged in a way that they'll be able to use it. So just encouraging them to think about how they're going to ask for that information to be made available at the end of a digitization project. Our next steps moving forward are just to slowly push this out. Gordon and I have treated this as a research project, so it's not a department initiative. It's a set of guidelines looking for a home within our department. But then when we reach that phase of getting departmental buy-in, and that's something that we've been working on over the last month or so, we need to push that out institutionally. So in the end, we make decisions about what we'd like to see done, but we don't control the resources to be able to make those projects happen. So getting buy-in from our reformatting committee that approves the projects, from our cataloging department that has control over the licensing agreements and metadata reuse or distribution. And then our digital initiatives unit, which controls platforms. So how that metadata would be able to be made available along with the images. So sorry to have run through that so quickly. We'll be taking questions at the end of the overall session. So we'll look forward to that at the end.